In this video, we are going to talk about polar versus nonpolar bonds. What is electronegativity? What is a bond dipole? How to identify the most polar bond, and a quantitative way to determine a polar versus nonpolar bond with Pauling's electronegativity scale. Polar and nonpolar bonds are both covalent bonds. Covalent bonds are created between a nonmetal and nonmetal or a nonmetal and metalloid. A covalent bond is formed through the sharing of electrons between the two elements. This sharing of electrons can be equal or unequal. A polar bond has an unequal sharing of electrons between the two elements, and a nonpolar bond has an equal sharing of electrons between the two elements. If we can imagine that there are electrons in between the two elements, a nonpolar bond will equally share those electrons, and a polar bond will shift the electrons towards the side of the more electronegative element. Electronegativity is the driving force for creating a polar bond. Electronegativity is the attraction of electrons towards an element. The trend for electronegativity will increase up and towards the right on the periodic table, with fluorine being the most electronegative element, and the noble gases are excluded. This is what creates a polar bond. The electrons will gather on the side of the more electronegative element, and there is an unequal sharing of electrons. When a bond is polar, we can draw a bond dipole. The arrow is called a bond dipole and shows the direction of the movement of electron density. The head of the arrow will be partially negative because this is where the electrons will be, and electrons are negatively charged. The tail of the arrow will be partially positive because electrons will be absent. To determine the most polar bond without electronegativity values, we will see which bond has the most electronegative element and which two elements have the greatest distance between each other on the periodic table. In this example, we are going to look at how to find the most polar bond based on these two rules. Let's first find the most electronegative elements on the periodic table. The elements that we are looking for will be oxygen, sulfur, carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen. We know that the electronegativity trend increases up and to the right towards fluorine, so the closest element to fluorine will be oxygen. Oxygen is the most electronegative element. We will be looking for any answer choices that has oxygen, the most electronegative element, within that bond. Now that we know that oxygen is the most electronegative element, we're going to be looking at the two answer choices that has oxygen within the bond. We're going to see from OS and OH which answer choice has the greatest distance in between those two elements. And the greatest distance will mean that they have the greatest change in electronegativity and will be the most polar bond. The bonds that we are looking at will be oxygen and sulfur, and oxygen and hydrogen. Between sulfur and hydrogen, the greatest distance in between the two elements will be from oxygen and hydrogen because oxygen and sulfur are right next to each other. The OH bond will be the most polar bond that we have out of the answer choices given.